Welcome to Blood Moons and the Crown, a prophetic anthology of the end times. Each week, these fictional, biblically based short stories speak to what will happen before the war at Armageddon, where Jesus Christ will return to earth and eradicate Satan and sin from our world. Learn what the Bible has to say about end times prophecy through these emotionally charged accounts of what people could one day face.
Part 3. The Library. He had always been a man who woke early. The city had several large public libraries. He had used them rarely, preferring bookshops, but he knew them. He went now to the largest one. The reference section had been partially reorganized. He noticed the gaps on the shelves where religious texts had been. The gaps were visible because whoever had removed the books had not bothered to close up the space, and the empty brackets sat there like missing teeth. He found the card catalog terminal and searched for Bible and received 17 results, all but 2 of which were listed as on loan. He requested the 2. He waited 45 minutes. A librarian returned to the desk without the books. She was a small woman of his own age, with careful eyes. "The items you requested are under administrative review," she said quietly. She did not look at her screen when she said this. She looked at him. "Under review for how long?" "I'm not in a position to say." He held her gaze for a moment. Something in her expression, not quite communication, but not quite nothing either. "Is there anything else that might help me?" he said carefully. "I'm looking for information about a specific passage in the book of Revelation." Her face did not change. "Sir, I'm afraid our holdings in that area are very limited at this time." She placed a small piece of paper on the counter between them with a list of recommended resources, all World Church affiliated. "Our digital catalog is comprehensive." She slid the paper toward him. As she did, her hand hovered for just a fraction of a second over a second piece of paper. A sticky note, yellow, folded, that was sitting beneath her palm. She withdrew her hand without touching it, without looking at him. He looked at the sticky note. He reached out and picked it up. She had already turned away. He walked quickly to a reading alcove and unfolded the note. A street address and a time. Nothing else. The note was handwritten in small, careful letters. He sat with the note in his hand for a long time. The address led him to a residential building in a quartier he knew only vaguely, older, quieter, the kind of neighborhood that had not yet been fully absorbed into the homogeneity that was descending on the city. He arrived at the time written on the note, which was 8 in the evening. He pressed the buzzer for the flat number indicated. A pause. Then a voice. A woman's voice, elderly. "Who is it?" "I was given this address by someone at the library. I'm looking for the Bible." A longer pause. Then the door clicked open. She was perhaps 80, small and sharp-eyed, with the upright posture of a woman who had once been tall. She wore a dark cardigan. She looked at him for a long moment on the doorstep. "Come in," she said, quietly. The apartment was small and warm, and absolutely full of books. He noted immediately that the curtains were fully drawn, and that the light came from a single lamp in the corner. 3 other people sat in the room. A man of about his own age, heavy-set, with the hands of someone who had worked outdoors. A younger woman, perhaps 40, with a child's drawing clutched in her hands as if it were a talisman. And a very young man, barely 20, who looked as though he had not slept in some time. They looked at him with the wariness of people who have learned to be careful. "Sit," the old woman said. She did not offer her name. "What do you want to know?" He sat. He said, "I want to know about the book of Revelation, about a mark, about not being able to buy or sell." The room changed slightly in the way that atmospheres change, a relaxation of something, a resolution of something that had been held in suspension. The old woman went to a shelf. She reached behind a row of large encyclopedias and withdrew a book. She held it for a moment in her hands the way you hold something valuable, and then she brought it to him. It was a Bible. Old, the cover worn, the pages foxed at the edges. Someone had loved this book for a long time. "I'll let you see it," she said, "but I can't let it leave this room." He nodded. He opened it. His hands were not entirely steady. "Revelation," he said. "Which chapter?" The older man across the room, who had not spoken until now, said, "Chapter 13, verses 16 and 17, and then also verse 18. His voice was quiet and measured. "Though you might want to read the whole chapter. The context matters." He found it. He had never read the Bible in his life. He found the book of Revelation in the index, found chapter 13, found the verses, and he read. He read that a beast would cause all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and enslaved, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. He read that no one could buy or sell unless they had the mark. He read a number. He sat with the page for a long time. "How long have you known about this?" he finally asked. "Some of us were Christians before the l'enlèvement," the old woman said. She sat in her chair across from him. "We knew what it meant when it happened. We knew what would come next." "But you're still here. You didn't—" "No." Her voice was neither apologetic nor ashamed, simply honest. "We are not the ones who were taken. We believed, we thought. But the Lord knew better than we did. There is more than one kind of believing." She paused. "We are here because we are meant to be here. That is what we now believe." "And the mark?" "We will not take it," the young man said. His voice was fierce and afraid in equal parts. The older man said, "You should know what the text says it means. Taking the mark. The text is very specific. It is not simply compliance, it is allegiance. The person who takes the mark is declaring that they worship what the beast represents. It has a spiritual dimension that the authorities either don't understand or don't care about." "The High Shepherd," he said. It was not quite a question. "The text speaks of two figures," the old woman said. "One is political, one is religious. The religious one is called the false prophet. He leads people to worship the political one, and he enforces the mark." She looked at him steadily. "Read chapter 16 and chapter 19, the end of those who take the mark." He read. He sat in that warm, curtained room for 2 hours, and he read. And the 4 others in the room sat with him in a patient silence that he recognized, eventually, as prayer. He read things that he had no rational framework for. A great deal of the imagery was opaque to him, the symbolism of a tradition he had never engaged with. But the passages they had directed him to were as clear as structural specifications. He read them with an engineer's attention to precision. When he finally put the book down, his hands were resting on the worn cover and his head was bowed. He did not pray, he did not know how, but he was, for the first time in 30 years, not certain that there was no one to pray to. "What do I do?" he asked. The old woman leaned forward. "You believe what you have read," she said, "and you hold on." Part 4. The Narrowing. The registration deadline came and passed. He did not register. The first consequence he noticed was at the grocery on the corner, 5 days after the deadline. He brought his basket to the counter. Bread, milk, the particular cheese he liked. And the young man at the register scanned the items and said, with a look of genuine discomfort, "Sir, I need to verify your registration before I can process this." He said he had not registered. The young man looked more uncomfortable. He called the manager. The manager, a woman in her 40s who had seen him every week for 4 years, looked at him with an expression that contained several things at once: sympathy and apology, and beneath them both, something that looked like relief that this particular moment was happening to him and not to her. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I can't process the transaction without it. We'd lose our license." He left the basket on the counter and walked home. He had some food in the apartment. He inventoried it carefully that evening, in the methodical way he had once inventoried materials for a construction project. He had 2 weeks, perhaps 3 weeks, of reasonable food. Then less and less. He had a medication for his blood pressure and one for cholesterol, 3 weeks' supply of each. After that, he would not be able to fill the prescriptions. He did not know what the consequences of that would be. He supposed he would find out. He sat in his armchair and felt the change in the apartment. 4 years of comfortable retirement, of good coffee and long walks and books, and the pleasant uselessness of a man who has earned his rest. It was all still here, physically, but something had shifted in its quality. The armchair was still comfortable. The books were still on their shelves. The city still murmured beyond the windows. But the apartment had begun to feel different. It had begun to feel, he thought, like a cell. A generous cell for now. But a cell. His friend Gerard called. "I heard from Margot that you haven't registered," Gerard said. He sounded worried. He sounded, under the worry, slightly impatient. "What are you doing?" "I'm thinking about it." "There's nothing to think about. You can't function. You can't buy groceries. Your bank account is frozen. Has it frozen yet?" "It froze on Thursday." "My God, come and do it. I'll come with you. It takes 15 minutes. "Gerard, what do you know about the Book of Revelation?" A pause. "What?" "The Book of Revelation. In the Bible. Have you read it?" "I haven't read the Bible since school, and I was barely paying attention then." "What does that have to do with anything?" "I think it might have quite a lot to do with this." A longer pause. Then, with the care of someone who loves a person they think may be having a breakdown. "My friend, I think the stress of the last few months, the vanishing, all of it, I think it's affected people in different ways. Some people have become very religious, in an extreme way. There are whole communities of them, apparently. People who think this is some kind of fulfillment of prophecy." He paused. "These communities are being monitored. They're being called destabilizing elements. I don't want you to—" "I've read the passage," he said, "in Revelation, about the mark, about not being able to buy or sell." Another pause. Much longer. "Are you saying you think this is— that you believe?" "I don't know what I believe," he said. "But I know what I read, and I'm not going to take it until I understand what I'm being asked to sign." Gerard tried again for 20 minutes. He thanked his friend and ended the call. He did not hear from Gerard again. The small community he had found through the library began to be his lifeline. They met irregularly and at different locations, never the same place twice, never with advance notice through any digital channel. The method of communication had become, of necessity, the kind that left no trace. Notes passed hand to hand, brief encounters on agreed street corners, the kind of human network that had existed before electronics and had outlasted them. He was not the only newcomer. Each time he saw the group, it had grown by 1 or 2 people, men and women who had, for reasons as various as human reasons can be, refused the mark and found themselves adrift in the new world. The old woman's apartment received them twice more before she told them, with characteristic directness, that she had been visited by 2 men from something called the Religious Compliance Office, and that while they had not done anything specific, they had made it clear that unregistered religious gatherings were under surveillance. After that, they met in different places: someone's garage, a back room of a laundry, Once in a small park at midnight, huddled on a bench in the cold with a shared copy of the Bible passed between them. He listened more than he spoke. He was the least prepared of any of them. The others had backgrounds in faith, however lapsed or wavering, and he had almost nothing. But he read voraciously in the time he spent alone, in his armchair, in the narrowing apartment. The old woman had lent him, through a chain of careful hands, a paperback Bible, not the leather-bound one she guarded so carefully, but an older paperback, its pages soft as cloth. He read it the way he had never read a book before, not as a critic, not as a scholar, but as a man reading instructions. As a man reading something that was trying, across a vast distance of time, to tell him something he needed to know before it was too late. He still did not know quite what to make of it. There was much he did not understand, much he suspected he was reading without the proper preparation, missing nuances and resonances that a lifetime of faith would have provided. But the central things, the things that bore on his immediate situation, were not obscure to him. They were, in fact, extraordinarily clear. He was an engineer. He understood specifications. He understood when a document was saying, "Do not do this." He was not, he reflected, becoming a believer in the way he thought of believers. He had not had a vision. He had not felt a warm light. He was not certain of anything theological, but he had read the book. And he was not, as he had not been in his professional life, willing to proceed on uncertain ground. So he stayed where he was, and the apartment narrowed around him. He began to trade his possessions. This had not been his first instinct. His first instinct, practical and stubborn, had been to find non-registration channels for obtaining necessities. And they existed, in the same underground way that everything forbidden exists, accessed through the same word-of-mouth networks that had given him the library note. There were markets. There were people who would trade food and medication for other things. Cash, which was still changing hands in these informal exchanges, though it was becoming increasingly meaningless in the registered economy. Goods, skills. He had no particular skills that were in demand. He had the things in his apartment. He sold, traded technically, his second television first, then an old camera, then a set of kitchen knives that had been his wife's, and that he had kept, not because he needed them, but because she had loved them. He felt, as he handed over each item, a small and precise grief. The apartment was becoming a record of things lost. The coffee table went, a beautiful thing, heavy oak, which he had carried up 7 flights of stairs 20 years ago with a friend who was no longer alive. A man he barely knew took it away on a small trolley in exchange for 2 weeks' worth of groceries and a month's supply of his blood pressure medication. He stood in the space where the table had been and breathed through it. His books he kept as long as he could. The Bible he had borrowed he kept, and he read it every day, in the winter light from the tall windows, sitting in his armchair, which was one of the last large pieces of furniture in the increasingly hollow apartment. He had kept his bed, his armchair, a small side table, and the lamp. Everything else had gone, piece by piece, into the hands of strangers in exchange for the minimal requirements of continued existence. He had begun, in the evenings, to talk to God. He did not call it prayer, because the word felt too large for what he was doing, too formal, too full of implications he was not yet willing to claim. He called it, in his own mind, simply talking. He sat in his armchair with the Bible open and he talked, in a low voice, about what he was reading and what he did not understand, and occasionally about his wife, and occasionally about the bridge he had designed in Bordeaux that had been standing for 22 years and that he hoped was still standing, and occasionally about the fact that he was 68 years old and alone and frightened, and genuinely did not know what to believe, but was doing his best to believe something. He did not receive, as he had been told in the books he had found at the bottom of a box somewhere that he might receive, a clear and comforting voice in return. He received instead a quiet, not an empty quiet, a different quality of quiet than the apartment's ordinary silence, something that he could not quantify and that he refused to pathologize. He held on to it. The small community was shrinking, in the way that things shrink under pressure. 2 of their members had registered. He did not judge them. He had sat in enough of their gatherings to understand the particular shape of the pressure on each of them. The woman with the child's drawing had a daughter, 12 years old, for whom she was sole parent, and the child could not be fed or schooled or medically attended without the registration. He had watched this woman make her decision with his own eyes, at a gathering in someone's cold garage, and he had seen on her face the thing that he suspected was the most honest expression of impossible choice he had ever witnessed. He had said nothing. He had gripped her hand as she left. The young man, the one who had been so fierce, who had barely slept, had disappeared. No one knew where he had gone. They did not ask too many questions when people disappeared, because the questions sometimes led to answers that were not helpful. Of the original group from the old woman's apartment, only 3 remained. Himself, the older man with the outdoor hands, whose name he had learned was Renee, and the old woman herself. They met less frequently now. The city had acquired a quality of surveillance that had not been there 6 months ago. Not dramatic, not uniformed, but pervasive in the way that changed air quality is pervasive, felt in the lungs before it is visible to the eye. There were cameras. There were people who watched. There was the Religious Compliance Office, which had expanded its mandate considerably since its initial announcement, and which now operated, from what he understood, as a kind of enforcement arm of the World Church, with powers that the old police forces had not had, and that were largely unaccountable to any oversight he could identify. He thought about his wife, often in these weeks. He thought about her faith, the quiet, private, pencil-in-the-margin faith that she had carried her entire life, and that he had regarded with a fond and slightly patronizing respect, as one regards something that a beloved person believes in without quite understanding why. He thought about the question he had never asked her. What did it feel like, to believe? What was the architecture of it, from the inside? He had been too busy, or too proud, or too certain of his own sufficiency to ask. He thought, if he had asked, perhaps she would have told him something he could have kept. Perhaps he would not be sitting here now in an empty apartment with a borrowed Bible and a side table and a lamp, trying to construct from first principles a faith that she had lived with her whole life as naturally as breathing. Perhaps. But then, perhaps this was the only way it could have come to him. Perhaps a man like him, methodical, skeptical, built for evidence, could not have walked in through the front door of faith. Perhaps he had to be stood at the outside wall for long enough that he found, one day, a crack in it, and pushed through. Part 5. The Knock. He was reading when they came. He was in his armchair, the last furniture, essentially, aside from the bed, with the Bible open on his knee and the lamp on and the winter light coming gray and thin through the tall windows. He was in the Gospel of John, because the old woman had told him to read it, and he had found, to his surprise, that the man in it was. He had difficulty still, with precise theological declarations. But there was a man in the Gospel of John who spoke in a way that he had not encountered before in any text, technical or literary, and who seemed to be speaking directly across the centuries to a 68-year-old retired engineer sitting alone in an increasingly empty apartment in a city that was becoming somewhere else, and he had read the same chapters many times. In the beginning was the Word. He heard them on the stairs before they knocked. There were at least 4 of them. He could tell by the heaviness of the tread, The multiple footfalls, the way the old building's staircase transmitted sound. They were not trying to be quiet. He closed the Bible. He placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, where he had taken to keeping it. He sat. The knock was not a polite knock. It was the kind of knock that expects the door to yield. He did not rush. He rose from the armchair carefully, because his knee had been bothering him in the cold, and he crossed the room, and he opened the door. There were 4 of them. They wore uniforms he had not seen before, dark, with the World Church symbol on the sleeve, and an insignia he did not recognize on the chest. They did not show identification, because it was apparently no longer necessary to show identification. The one at the front, a broad-shouldered man of perhaps 45, with the flat eyes of someone who has been doing this long enough that it no longer requires anything from him emotionally, looked at a device in his hand, and then at his face. "Unregistered individual," the man said. He said it the way you say a fact. "You have been located pursuant to a compliance order issued by the Religious Harmony Directorate. You are required to come with us." The Religious Harmony Directorate, he said. He had not heard this name before. "Is that the same as the compliance office?" "Come with us, please." "I'd like to—" The second man, younger, with a shaved head, had already moved past him into the apartment. He watched as the man moved through the rooms, quickly, professionally, not looking at him but scanning the space. The other 2 men took positions on either side of him. He did not try to resist. He was 68 years old with a bad knee and a borrowed Bible in his jacket pocket, and there were 4 of them. He was not afraid in the way he would have expected to be afraid, not the cold, sharp fear of immediate physical danger, but something calmer, more resigned, as if his body understood that a course of events had been set in motion long before this moment, and that this moment was simply where the road led. The man with the device looked at the apartment. He saw the armchair, the lamp, the bare walls, the bare floors where the furniture had been. He saw all of it with no particular expression. "You will not need to bring anything," he said. "May I ask where we're going?" No answer. "May I—" He paused. "May I say a prayer before we leave?" The man with the flat eyes looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded, not with permission, exactly, but with the impatience of someone who is willing to wait 30 seconds. He stood in the center of his empty apartment. He put his hand over the Bible in his pocket. He closed his eyes. He did not know how to pray. He had told himself this for months. He still did not know the words. But he stood there for 30 seconds in the silence of his apartment. The hum of the city below, the flat-eyed men behind him, the winter light through the tall windows. And he said, without speaking, "I don't know your name yet." "Not really, but I think you know mine. I think you've known it for a while. And I think my wife knew you, and you knew her. And I think I will see her." He opened his eyes. He turned. He walked out of the apartment with the men behind him, and he did not look back. Part 6. The Oak Tree. The park was one he knew. He had walked through it before. Years ago, before the retirement, before the vanishing, on Sunday mornings with his wife, when they had lived on the other side of the city. It was a large park, the kind that had been old for centuries, with broad avenues of chestnut trees and a central green and, in the far quarter, a stand of ancient oaks that were older than anything built nearby. He had walked under those oaks with his wife on autumn mornings, and she had said something once. He was remembering it now, as he was brought through the park in the cold air. She had said that oaks like these had seen so much of history, and she had meant it as a peaceful thing, but standing under them now he heard it differently. There were over 100 people gathered near the oaks, in a loose and miserable assemblage that he recognized immediately as what it was. They looked the way he felt. cold, frightened, stripped of whatever they had been before, standing now in the simplest possible version of themselves. Men and women of all ages, a few young people, several who were clearly elderly. One woman was weeping openly, steadily, in the way of someone who has been weeping for a long time. Most stood in silence. He was placed among them. The 4 uniformed men handed him off and departed without ceremony. The apparatus of what was to come was not elaborate. Several heavy beams had been erected between and below the largest oaks. Rope, the things that are required for this, and that he made himself look at directly because he was an engineer and he had always looked at structures and assessed them rather than looking away. He had, he supposed, known it would come to this. The old woman had told him, in that warm, curtained room with the Bible in her hands, the text is clear about what happens to those who refuse the mark. And later, Renee, quiet and steady. In the time of the tribulation, the faithful who will not yield will be offered a different path to the same destination. He had not quite understood then. He understood now. They had organized it with bureaucratic thoroughness. There were officials. There were forms. There were people with clipboards moving through the crowd, verifying identities, ticking names off lists. He watched them come toward him in turn. Each person in the crowd consulted and noted, and he thought, even this, even here, they are keeping records. Even in this place, they need the forms filled out. The woman who came to him was young. She could not have been more than 30. She wore a professional jacket despite the cold, and she held a clipboard, and she looked at it and then at him with an expression that he found, ultimately, impossible to fully read. It contained many things. He chose to believe it contained, somewhere underneath the professional neutrality, something human. I need to confirm your identity for the record, she said. She had a pen ready. He looked at her. He looked at the pen and the clipboard. He looked at the forms. He thought of his wife's hands on a black leather book. He thought of the old woman's apartment and the warmth of it and the quality of that silence. He thought of the Gospel of John, the parts he had read so many times that they had become his own thoughts. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He thought of a bridge he had built in Bordeaux that was still standing. He thought of 40 years in a profession dedicated to the principle that things must be built on the right foundation or they will fall. He thought of what the right foundation was. He thought of his wife saying, I will see you. She had said this near the end, in one of her last moments of lucidity, when she had known him and known herself, and known that neither of these things would last much longer. She had said, I will see you. And he had understood it then as the desperate comfort of a dying woman, and he had said yes because he loved her, and because it was what she needed to hear, and he had not believed it. He believed it now. Your name, please, the young woman said. He was quiet for a moment. The bare branches of the ancient oak moved above him in the cold wind. Around him 100 and more, men and women who had read the same words he had read, or who had always known them, or who had found their way to refusal by some other road he could not imagine, stood in their patience and their fear and their something other than fear. He looked at the young woman. He looked at her clipboard. He thought of every name he had ever been called, the name his parents had given him, the name on his degrees and his pension documents and his engineering certificates, the name she had whispered against the side of his face on the morning they were married, the name the disease had finally taken from her eyes. All of these names, all of this weight of names, and under all of them, the one he had been given, the one he had not known to claim, the one that had been waiting in a book he had never read, in a God he had never believed in a woman's faith he had respected without understanding until it was almost too late. He lifted his chin. God's child, he said.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope this episode has inspired and encouraged you as you draw closer to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. If you have thoughts, questions, or comments, we'd love to hear from you. You reach us via email at rev11.15media@gmail.com. We hope you're enjoying the story and learning what the Bible reveals about end times prophecy and the final battle at Armageddon. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. May God keep and protect you always.